Radio 2.
And on Radio 2 in half an hour's time at 10:30, Nick Jackson presents this week's edition of Star Sound Extra, which tonight focuses on British film, including a feature on the Ealing comedies with director Charles Crichton. And John Benson casts a nostalgic gaze back at some of the favourite musical personalities of the variety era. That's Star Sound Extra with Nick Jackson at 10:30. The time now is 2 minutes past 10, and we're delighted to present our tribute to that much-loved comedian, Eric Morecambe.
I have received thousands of letters, and my family and myself, we've read them all. And I have to say they've been an enormous comfort. I've been overwhelmed at the reaction of everybody, that they should feel so much grief for someone who isn't really a member of their family, and yet they all felt that he was.
Eric, to Stella and my family, was the first name we would think of to invite to a family occasion. He came into our house, and immediately seeing my mother-in-law, he'd say, "Hello, Mum," and he'd start jumping about and making everybody happy. He was the life and soul of the party. Even Jimmy Tarbuck, who was a great pro and a funny man, would stand back and enjoy Eric's performance. He would perform at the drop of a hat. That was Eric. He just loved being Eric. That was his bonus in life.
Eric was a super comic and a superstar. And to be both of these, particularly a superstar, the public have to care about that person above and beyond the performance. They think about what they're like after the show, when they're at home. Are they nervous during the show? What is their family like? Where do they live? This is a very select few that the public really care about like this. And certainly Eric was a first-class member.
There's never been another Eric Morecambe. Can't be. Unique humour. Completely different from anybody else. He had a quality that very few comics have. First of all, his wit was very sharp, and he could turn any sort of thing that went wrong to his advantage. That's the essence of a great comic. He was never at a loss for words, and he could do a visual ad-libs, which is most difficult. Not just verbal ad-libs, but visual ad-libs. He'd pick up something and make a profit of it. Wouldn't assaults or anything like that. He was a funny man, essentially a funny man. So the whole, every fibre of his being was concerned with making people laugh.
You could depend on him to get that audience roaring with laughter, because it just flowed from him. He had this, I don't know what one would say, it was almost like hyper-super tension that he had inside him. And when he went on there, he was transformed and he was magic. And if in doubt, he fetched out the paper bag and did his clicking of the paper bag. Or he would grab me and say, "My little fat friend." And of course, the more nervous and tension he had, the harder he used to slap my face.
Just around the corner, maybe sunshine for you.
One of a Kind, an appreciation of Eric Morecambe, OBE, introduced by Roy Castle.
I think the sentiments expressed there by Frankie Vaughan, Dickie Henderson, Harry Secombe and Ernie Wise will be echoed by all of us. But I think Eric's wife, Joan, put her finger on the key when she said everybody felt he was a member of their family. I certainly felt he was a member of mine. He very nearly was. How about this for a track record? He introduced me to the girl who eventually became my wife, Fiona. His daughter Gail was bridesmaid at our wedding. Eric was godfather to my eldest boy, Daniel. My daughter Julia was bridesmaid for Eric's daughter Gail. And Fiona was godmother to Gail's daughter Amelia. So you can see, we were almost related. And I can tell you that whenever we were going to meet up, there was always that extra gleam in the eyes of my whole family. Eric's quality was love through humour. He could say the wickedest things to people and nobody minded. It was an honour to be insulted by Eric Morecambe. Any tensions immediately dispersed. He was so far ahead, that's all. He was like an athlete who knew he was winning. He was able to give a victory wave long before that finishing line. But for all of us, that finishing line came far too soon. On Sunday, the 27th of May, 1984, Eric kept a long-standing date with his old chum, Stan Stennett, at the Roses Theatre, Tewkesbury. A charity show one of few engagements he'd chosen to do before taking life a little easier. It turned out to be his farewell performance in a small provincial theatre, similar to the hundreds he'd played all those years ago on his way to the top. His death stunned the entire country. His millions of fans, his many friends, his fellow professionals, but above all, his loved ones.
One goes through all the various emotions. You go past the stage of crying. You come out of shock, and that takes time because the shock is absolutely enormous when something is so completely unexpected, which sounds strange when you think how many times he's been on the brink of death. But the point is, at this particular time, he wasn't. Everything seemed absolutely marvellous. Everything seemed fine, and this was a fun occasion. No strain, no stress, something that he was going to enjoy doing, and he did enjoy doing it.
I don't know, there was something about that night. There was something special about that night anyway. He arrived at the theatre about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We didn't start the show till 7 o'clock. He came in, put his arms around me and said, "How long do you want me to do, boss?" And we laughed about that, and he laughed with the cleaners, he laughed with the people getting the scenery ready. He spent half the evening in the dressing room just talking to the rest of the pros. He didn't want a room on his own. He wanted us to go in with the rest of the acts on the bill, just talking about the old days of variety. The audience loved him right from the moment he stepped on stage. There was something extra special about that night, in as much as he said that he was going to take things easy from now on, but he enjoyed every moment of that evening with us in Tewkesbury. Right up until the last, when he went off, he took about 5 curtain calls, came back on when we were playing a number called The Entertainer at the end, Alan Randall and myself and the trio. He came back on, he played a little bit of the xylophone with Alan, he played a little bit of piano, he went over and he banged the drums a few times, and then he went off stage in the usual way, sort of Bring Me Sunshine type of walk off with his arms in the air and his legs in the air and so on, into the wings, and the next thing we knew, he'd collapsed. But, the audience was standing as one at the end of that. They loved that little extra bit that he'd given them. Eric lived for laughter, and when he went, I'm afraid that a lot of laughter went out of a lot of people's lives.
The funeral, which was an ordeal in a way in itself, but it was also, strangely enough, a tremendous comfort, because for a start, so many people I found were grieving with me. It was rather a fantastic tribute that the whole of the town came to a standstill and everyone virtually joined in the funeral. People were so respectful, they were so absolutely quiet at the right time. It became a great occasion somehow. It was quite beautiful, and the actual service itself was exactly as Eric would have wanted it. There was a lovely little bit of sort of light relief from Dickie Henderson, done quite beautifully and exactly as Eric would have wanted it. There's no two ways about it. I hope that he was watching at the time, because he would have enjoyed it.
I hope he was too. And if he didn't enjoy it, it was his own fault, because he's the one who told me to do it. And I'll tell you exactly how it happened. When my very dear friend, well, everybody's dear friend Arthur Askey, left us at his memorial service, I was asked to give the address, and Eric was there. And a couple of days later, I got this letter from Eric. "Dear Dickie, I very rarely write to famous people. That's why I'm writing to you. I would just like to say that I thought you were superb the other day, and I'm sure that Big Arthur would have been proud of you. I would like to book you for mine, work permitting. I would like to be cremated, and my favorite song is Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. Okay, that's fixed. I'll pay you when I see you down there. Love, Eric. P.S. Nothing in this letter constitutes a contract."
I was privileged, along with Dickie Henderson, to be part of the service, and I was reading one of the lessons, and I made my personal tribute to Eric at the service, and it was a big event. But the numbing part of it was that the star of the show was Eric, and for the first time in his life, he didn't have a go at everybody. Every time there was this little gap here, there was a little gap there, I thought Eric would have been in. He would have been in there. Oh, he would have had that vicar right off his seat, you know. He would have destroyed the whole proceedings. There were 2 other people at that service who I'm sure were thinking the same. The two fellas who were responsible for writing those marvellous black and white television shows in the 60s. Two men who themselves were as well known as the stars of the show. Messrs. Hills and Green, otherwise known as the lovable Sid and Dick.
I think his brilliance was his infinite capacity to see himself in a funny role in any situation, which was a challenge to us. So we were opened up into giving every situation we could possibly do. I mean, one minute he came on as a magician, pretending that he was good at it, and trying to con everybody that he was good at it, with dove feathers flying all over his suit. And the next minute he was conducting the whole orchestra in Peter and the Wolf. And when Ernie came on to do the recitation, he thought he was trying to tell a joke and stop him, you know. He could play all those nuances of character: anger, frustration, madness, cunning, you know. He was a great comedy performer.
You could bring the biggest star you ever had in the universe on. But Eric would be Eric. It was a line that we used to give him, get 'em off. That was his basic principle. He'd idolise them when they were off stage. But when they walked on stage, when he said get 'em off, he meant it. That was his genius. When he said those lines, he meant it. And he really believed it.
He certainly did mean it as well. But what a list of stars have had to battle against Eric's get-em-off attitude on television. I mean, it reads like a who's who of the theatre. Sir Ralph Richardson, Glenda Jackson, Vanessa Redgrave, even Andre Previn, and that epitome of the English gentleman, Robert Morley, whose behaviour at rehearsals provided Eric with one of his favourite stories.
We used to rehearse in those days when Bob Morley was doing the show with us. We rehearsed at a place called Delgado Way, which is an old folks' home. And Robert arrived on the Monday, and he says, at 12:30, he says, now, where do we go for lunch? So we said, well, Mr. Morley, we don't have any lunch. I said, because they don't make lunch here. So what we do, I said, I bring a flask of pea soup, something like that, and a few sandwiches. And Ernie says, well, I bring a mug so I can take some of Eric's soup and eat sandwiches that he's left. So I said, if you want to, a bowl of pea soup and a sandwich. He said, oh. So he ate the lot. Ate all my sandwiches. It's true, he ate all my sandwiches and 3/4 of my pea soup. He said, well, leave lunch to me tomorrow. I'll bring the lunch in tomorrow. So he arrives the following morning. No parcels in his hand. No food. No goodies. So we're rehearsing. Well, 12:30 comes along. He says, I think we ought to break now. I said, yes. So I said, all right then. We sit down, we chat, and 1:45 you hear beep, 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 outside, motorhome. You look out, Rolls Royce, liveried man. By liveried I mean the Eric von Stroheim riding habit and the thing from Sunset Boulevard, Gets out of the car, lifts up the boot, out comes the hamper, Fortnum Masons, up the stairs in this grotty place, and there we are with the champagne, the pate, roast duck it was, and the oils and the vinegars and the salads. Absolutely fantastic.
It was absolutely horrifying when they didn't stop for lunch. It was fairly horrifying where they rehearsed near Wormwood Scrubs. But to be with them, you see, was to prove you were a sport. That's why the actors all did it, partly to get him with the BBC, but really because they wanted, like the vicar, to be the Aunt Sally. And some of us, I don't think I had dreams of stealing the show. Well, of course, that would have been quite impossible. He knew so much more about it than we did. And they sat and told stories about Stan Bennett or somebody they'd been a double act with. But one of the best moments was when they were arguing about what so-and-so's gag was and whether so-and-so was top of the bill in Walsall in 1904. And very occasionally they'd break off and try a sketch. And then Ernie never remembered it. So Eric used to say to me, never remembers the gag lines, but he's very good with the money. And I always rather liked that. And as I say, we all went on to say, well, that just shows, although we're great stars, we can dig in with the best of them. And a few of us had illusions that we were going to shine. I must admit, I don't think we ever did. And he was a very delightful man with a terror that it was all going to stop. And Eric was he was very inventive and clever. I mean, there was a wonderful trick with the glasses, which he was always pushing into place. I don't know why that was so effective, but it was.
And the man who knew all about Eric's inventiveness at rehearsal was producer John Ammonds.
He had this unique quality, he had the genius, and that's not too high-flown a word to use, because the way he used to create comedy, in rehearsals, you'd get these extra bits and pieces, visuals especially, going into the script. I mean, Eric used to work and work and work and work and come out with ideas. In fact, at times, I used to think, why on earth can't we go home? We've done enough rehearsal. But no, he'd go through it again, and he'd only needed one person in that rehearsal room to laugh, and that would be magnetism. He'd be away then, and he'd perform even louder and louder, because laughter was the tonic, laughter was the spur, and he'd work even harder, because he couldn't work less than 100%.
John Ammonds was the producer of all the award-winning BBC Morecambe and Wise shows in the 1970s. But in 1954, he was a radio producer in Manchester, where Eric and Ernie, like so many top comedy stars before and after, recorded their first radio series. This was called Yo-Yo, or You're Only Young Once. Now, you've got to listen for Eric's joke about television here, because you'll gather from the laugh it gets that they hadn't always been successful on the small screen. But we'll come back to that a little later.
Ah, so you're Harry Secombe? Yes, please, I must speak to you. I'm in terrible trouble. Help! That was how I met Harry Secombe. Slowly I looked him over from head to toe, and then from side to side. The distance was about the same. I stood there admiring his physique. I use the term loosely, but then again, he had a loose physique. I spoke to him. Good morning. Can I help you? Are you Mr. Morecambe? Have you got a television set? No. I'm Mr. Morecambe. You may joke, laddies, but they don't call me handsome Harry Secombe for nothing. No? It costs money. Yes. For years, Secombe the comic has held a position of unparalleled silence, but now a new Secombe is about to blossom forth. Listen, sir. Don't laugh at me, 'cause I'm a fool. All right, Harry. We're convinced. Yes. You've got to admit I have something that Mario Lancer hasn't got. It sticks out a mile. Why don't you exercise?
I was fortunate enough to be, along with Stennett perhaps, in pantomime with the lads. And it was hysterical. I mean, I used to look forward to going to work. Pantomime, it's the smell of wet niggers and oranges, isn't it? It's the terrible noise coming over the tannoy. It's not something that a weak man goes into. Pantomime is something you have to gird your loins for. That audience lurking out there in the darkness waiting to savage you. But I used to enjoy going to work because there was always something different. Even though, he'd do the same thing night after night. He'd put something in, to throw me. And in that pantomime, one letter came from some disgruntled punter out front saying that the standard of comedy was pretty low, you see. And the bloke who ran the theatre stuck this notice up on the notice board backstage. So we thought, that's not good enough, said Eric to me. And I said, you're all right, Eric. So we concocted a letter between us saying how marvellous the comedy was and how brilliant these three comedians were, Secombe and Morecambe and Wise. And I got my dresser to write it out in longhand and posted it from outside town. And I remember the fella came backstage, the bloke who owned I wouldn't mention his name, the bloke who owned the theatre came backstage and looked at us. He said, I've got this letter, looking at me and Eric. And he said, oh yes, looking instantly. And he was forced to stick it up on the board alongside the other one, you see, so Honor was satisfied.
Several things come to mind when I think about him. I mean, they always bring a smile to my face, as I know he would like that to do with most people he ever met. One of them was a whoopee cushion. We all know what a whoopee cushion is. We used to use one of these, or Eric used to use one of these quite extensively in the pantomimes in order to get laughs. One particular time was when we were at Swansea, and I was being sort of set up to appear in a London show, and a couple of very big people came down, like Tom Arnold and Mr. Sam Newsom, who used to run the Commentary Theatre, to talk to me about doing a big show in London. And of course I was very excited about this, and I invited them into my room between shows, the matinee and the evening performance. We talked our business through, and the first person in my room after they'd gone was Eric. And he came in and, laughing all over his face, said, did they sit down? Did they sit down? And I said, no, why? And he went over to the two of the seats that I would have had them sit on, took the cushion off one, and underneath, of course, were each one was primed with a whoopee cushion. So The funny thing is, it does come round to a full circle, because of that night at Tewkesbury, we were doing a thing on stage, Eric and and I was just doing an interview spot with him. He was sitting in one chair, I was in another, and between us we had a little table. But the chairs that we were sitting in were wicker chairs. They were very comfortable, but there were no cushions on them. And it wasn't until after that I found out that he had a whoopee cushion with him, would you believe? It was in his pocket. And he would have been putting it under the cushion, had there been one there that night.
Oh, it's marvellous, isn't it? Everybody's got a funny story about Eric. Wherever he goes, he leaves you with a funny story or a funny reaction. He's got very quick reaction, too, and it's going on all the time. I remember once at the BBC television studios, waiting for the lift, and I was with Eric, and as the lift doors opened, there was Michael Parkinson standing there with a head-to-toe leather overcoat on. Before Michael could even step out of the lift, Eric said, "Do you always go to work in your wallet?" But let's get back to that joke about television, if you remember. You see, in 1954, they recorded their very first television series. It was called Running Wild, but 25 years and several television awards later, Eric could laugh over Running Wild, with the help of a newspaper cutting sent to him by his mother, Sadie.
Tuesday, August the 10th, 1954. Now, remember that. And it says here, audience rocked with laughter. And the fellow goes on to say, I owe comedians Morecambe and Wise a sincere apology. My first view of them was in their recent TV series, and I switched off. Now I meet them at the Palace Theatre this week, which is in Blackpool. And I am left wondering if they can possibly be the two artists who were in that television studio. They are, of course, but whatever it was that Broadcasting House did to them, they have left behind. And instead, we have two performers whose slick, first-time humour had last night's first house audience rocking in their seats. These two comedians are on the way up. Now listen to this. These two comedians are on the way up, provided they fight shy of television. That's fantastic, that.
And isn't that a fantastic laugh, eh? Eric's main relaxation in life was fishing. And we just haven't time to include all the many fishing anecdotes from his angling friends like Frankie Vaughan, Philip Jones of Thames Television, John Ammonds. But one of Eric's closest friends was Dickie Davies, you know, the man from World of Sport. And it was fishing that brought them together, as Dickie lives close to the River Test, one of the finest trout streams in the world. And Eric spent many happy days and weeks at Dickie's house. He even had his own back door key, would you believe? In fact, immediately prior to going for open heart surgery, he relaxed at Dickie's house in that beautiful part of Hampshire for quite a while. But Dickie's memory isn't of an apprehensive, worried Eric Morecambe, but, like everybody else's, a hilariously funny one.
Eric said to me on many occasions, he said, if ever you want me to appear on the show with you, he said, I'd love to. He said, you know how I love sport. And I said, well, I'd love it, Eric, if we can fix it up one day. But you couldn't always actually align comedy with sport every Saturday afternoon. But suddenly we came upon a Christmas program when we only had 2.5 hours, and it wasn't a normal sports day. There were no football matches. It wasn't a heavy news day. And the idea was that he turned up 2.5 hours early for the World of Sport Christmas party, which of course didn't happen until after the program finished. And that was the simple theme of the program. And we didn't rehearse anything. He said, I just want you to go on as if I'm not there. Don't try and make any funnies yourself, because I'll bury you alive. He said, just you carry on, and I will make all the humour around you. And I swear that's exactly what happened. We didn't rehearse one spot, and it was one of the most satisfying experiences I've ever had on television. I mean, the whole studio was in an uproar the entire 2.5 hours, and it was purely ad-lib. Going into commercial break, he said, I don't want the camera on me. He said, I just want the camera on my feet. And I would finish the link. So we'll take a break, and we'll be back in just a few moments with professional wrestling. And all you could see was feet applauding into the break. He was a genius. He came up with a new idea for every link, and that was for 2.5 hours. It was a joy to work with him.
I think I'd say he was an expert, and all my life I have admired experts and been very lucky to have met a good many. You're never in trouble when you have an expert at your elbow.
And nobody knew how good an expert he was more than Eddie Braben, the man who for the past 16 years scripted those now so precious television shows.
The trouble is, when you go in search of perfection, you very rarely find it. Eric Morecambe came as close as anyone. This constant striving for perfection brought with it that now familiar word, pressure. And this is where the most valuable person in his life deserves her tribute, his wife, Joan. It couldn't have been easy living with Eric when he was carrying the worries of his work. It must have been a great strain, but Joan never let it show. She is a quite remarkable lady, a lady of great charm, dignity, and elegance, which never left her even when the going was severe. I honestly believe that because of this wonderful lady, we got a few extra years of Eric Morecambe's magic that we weren't really entitled to.
There are certain little things now that I smile to myself about. He recently turned a small bedroom into a den, and this really is because he's so untidy. But he started off with his den immaculate, and we had proper shelving units made so that he could keep everything really tidy. And you go in there, and it looks like a bomb has hit it. There's a conglomeration of fishing stuff, and it's all mixed up with his cameras and all these albums that he'd started filling with his photographs. There's piles of photographs everywhere. And now, of course, now we can't bear to touch anything or tidy anything up because it's all so precious now.
Whenever you think of Eric, you smile. And the entire nation feels that way. And that's a tremendous legacy to leave.
I think we lost a person that when you looked at him on television, you relaxed, smiled, and felt everything was all right with the world. And that applied to the whole family. He actually was part of the family.
The only tribute that can follow that comes from a 6-year-old girl whose mother told us that her little daughter used to love Eric on the television, like we all did. And when she saw his picture on the news bulletins on television and the newspaper front pages, she asked why. And so her mother explained that Eric had died and he'd gone to heaven. Well, the little girl looked very sad for a few seconds, and then her face brightened, and she looked up and she said, "Oh, Mummy, won't God laugh?"
Laughter all the while in this world where we live.
One of a Kind, an appreciation of Eric Morecambe, OBE, was introduced by Roy Castle, taking part were Mrs. Joan Morecambe, John Ammonds, Eddie Braben, Dickie Davies, Sid Green and Dick Hills, Dickie Henderson, Robert Morley, Harry Secombe, Stan Stennett, Frankie Vaughan, and Ernie Wise, with the voice of Eric Morecambe. One of a Kind was produced by Mike Craig.
Arsenal! Bring me sunshine, bring